Imagine planning your wedding, only to find out your brother and fiancé have been lying to you for months. My world is about to be torn apart, and the truth will shock you. Jake's fiancé and his brother have been hiding a secret that will destroy everything. Jake and John Monroe stood at the kitchen counter, Jake holding a steaming cup of coffee, a relaxed smile playing on his lips. The early Atlanta sun poured through the window, catching the glint of Emma's engagement ring as she moved around the kitchen. "Just 3 more weeks to go," John said, his voice bubbling with excitement. Emma turned, her blonde hair swaying as her eyes met his. "I can hardly believe it's almost here," she replied, though her smile seemed to lack its usual warmth. Jake didn't notice the slight tension in her shoulders as he downed his coffee. His mind was already racing through the day's demands, a big project at the office and the endless wedding tasks swirling in his head. "Gotta run," he said, leaning in for a quick kiss on Emma's cheek. "See you tonight for dinner." She nodded, watching as he grabbed his briefcase and headed out the door. As John wove through the morning traffic, his phone buzzed, a message from his younger brother, Kevin. "Hey man, we still good for lunch?" John let out a small sigh, a mix of affection and frustration settling over him. Kevin, always needing something. But he was family, and Jake couldn't shake that familiar tug of responsibility. "Yeah, usual spot at 12:30, he texted back. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of meetings and phone calls. Before he knew it, Jake was sliding into a booth across from Kevin at their favorite diner. "So," Kevin started, flashing his usual charming grin, "how's the wedding planning coming along?" Jake couldn't help but chuckle. "It's going well. Busy, but under control. Emma's handling most of it." "Sounds great," Kevin nodded, though his eyes kept darting to his phone. "Listen, I hate to bring this up, but I'm kinda in a tight spot." And there it was. Jake felt his shoulders tense as Kevin began unraveling a story about a missed sales target and a possible eviction. It always came down to money with Kevin. "How much do you need?" Jake asked, cutting straight to the point. Kevin gave him a sheepish look. $2,000, just until my next commission check clears. I swear I'll pay you back." Jake rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. "Kevin, you're 30 years old. When are you going to get things together?" I know, Kevin replied, raising his hands in surrender. "I'm working on it. This is the last time, I promise." It was a promise Jake had heard more times than he cared to count, but despite that, he found himself reaching for his checkbook. Family is family, after all. As he scribbled out the check, Jake didn't catch the flicker of guilt that passed over Kevin's face. The next few weeks sped by in a blur of work and wedding prep. Before Jake knew it, the night of their engagement party had arrived. The backyard of their parents' suburban home had been transformed, twinkling lights stretched between the trees, and the scent of grilled barbecue filled the air. Jake stood by the makeshift bar, watching as Emma mingled with the guests. "She's a real gem," his father, Frank, said, giving him a hearty pat on the shoulder. "You did good, son." Jake grinned, a swell of pride rising in his chest. "Thanks, Dad." His mother, Brenda, bustled over, wrapping him in a tight hug. "My baby boy, all grown up and about to get married." "Mom," Jake groaned, though there was no real irritation in his voice. He adored his parents, even if they could be a little too much sometimes. The evening unfolded with laughter and endless congratulations. As the party began to slow down, Kevin clinked his glass, drawing everyone's attention. "If I could just have a moment," he said, his voice carrying across the yard, "I'd like to say a few words about my big brother and his amazing fiancée." Jake noticed Emma stiffen beside him as Kevin began to speak, but he was too wrapped up in the moment to catch on. "Jake's always been there for me," Kevin continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Through the good times and the bad, he's always had my back. And now, he's found someone who completes him in every way. He lifted his glass toward Emma. To Jake and Emma. May your love grow stronger with each passing day. The guests erupted into cheers, and Jake pulled Kevin into a tight hug. Thanks, little brother, he whispered as they embraced. Jake didn't catch the brief, loaded glance that passed between Kevin and Emma. The following days were a blur of final wedding preparations. Jake threw himself into his work, eager to wrap up a major project before taking time off for the honeymoon. Late one night, nearly midnight, his phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. His curiosity got the better of him, and when he opened it, his entire world shattered. Displayed on the screen were photos and a video, Emma and Kevin, tangled together in compromising positions. The timestamps showed they were recent, some from just days earlier. Jake felt like his stomach was turning inside out. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the images, each one cutting deeper into his heart. Sleep was impossible that night, his mind racing with questions, accusations, and disbelief. When morning came, he was waiting in the kitchen as Emma shuffled in, bleary-eyed and yawning. "We need to talk," Jake said, his voice cold and emotionless. Emma froze, immediately sensing the shift in his tone. "What's going on?" Without saying another word, Jake slid his phone across the counter. Emma's face went pale as she took in the images on the screen. "Jake, I can explain," she started, but he cut her off sharply. "Explain what, exactly?" he snapped. "How you've been sleeping with my brother. How both of you have been lying to my face." "It's not what it looks like," Emma pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. "Those pictures, they must be fake. Someone's trying to ruin us." Jake let out a bitter laugh, harsh and cold. "Don't insult my intelligence, Emma. I know what I'm looking at." What followed was an explosive argument. Accusations flew like daggers, their voices rising until they were both hoarse. Finally, Emma collapsed, sinking to the floor as sobs shook her body. "I'm sorry," she whispered between sobs. "I'm so sorry." Jake stood over her, his anger slowly giving way to an agonizing ache. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma looked up at him, her makeup streaked with tears. 6 months, she admitted softly. The confession hit Jake like a punch to the gut. 6 months, half a year of deceit and betrayal. "There's more," Emma said, her voice trembling. I'm pregnant." The room seemed to spin around Jake. He gripped the counter to keep from losing his balance. "Is it mine?" he asked, though deep down, he already knew the answer. Emma shook her head slightly. "I don't know," she whispered. "It could be yours, or Kevin's." In that moment, Jake felt something inside him break. The future he had envisioned, the life he had been building, came crashing down around him. "Get out," he said, his voice hollow and empty. "Pack your things and leave my house." Emma tried to reach out for him, but he recoiled from her touch. "Jake, please." "We're done," Jake said, his voice laced with finality. "The wedding's off. I never want to see you again." As Emma retreated to the bedroom in tears, Jake's mind shifted to Kevin, his own brother. The betrayal cut deeper than he thought possible, leaving a wound he wasn't sure would ever heal. With trembling hands, he dialed his parents' number. When his mother answered, he could barely find the words. "Mom," he croaked. "I need to talk to Dad. It's about Kevin." An hour later, Jake stood in his parents' living room, pacing like a caged animal. When the front door opened and Kevin strolled in, Jake saw nothing but red. "Hey, what's the big emergency?" Kevin's words barely left his mouth before Jake's fist connected with his jaw. "You son of a ____," Jake snarled, grabbing Kevin by the shirt and slamming him against the wall. "How could you do this?" Kevin's initial shock melted into a smug grin, despite the blood trickling from his split lip. "Bro, you can't blame me. Emma came on to me, said she needed a real man. That taunt sent Jake over the edge. His fists flew, pounding Kevin's face and body. She's pregnant with your kid. Jake roared. My future, my life, you destroyed it. It took both Frank and Brenda to pry Jake off his brother. Kevin slumped to the floor, his face a swollen mess of blood and bruises. Stop it, boys. Brenda shrieked, her voice panicked. We're family. Frank stepped between them, his face pale with disbelief. What in God's name is happening here? Through broken sobs and gasps, the truth spilled out. Brenda collapsed onto the couch, while Frank stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what he'd just heard. Jake, Frank finally spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment. Violence doesn't solve anything. We need to sit down and talk this through, as a family. Jake stared at his father in shock. Talk it through? Are you serious right now? Your brother made a mistake, Brenda added, her voice trembling with emotion. But he's still family. We can figure this out. Jake looked from his mother to his father, then at Kevin, who was now being fussed over by Brenda. And that's when the realization hit him, they were going to forgive Kevin again, just like always. No, Jake said, his voice icy and firm. Not this time. He's not my brother anymore. And if you're going to side with him, then I don't have parents either. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the house, ignoring his mother's cries and his father's desperate pleas to come back. As he climbed into his car, a new emotion surged through him, overtaking the pain and betrayal, rage. Unfiltered, raw rage. Driving away from the house he grew up in, Jake's mind raced. Who had sent those photos and videos? Why now, so close to the wedding? And more importantly, what was he going to do about it? One thing was clear, Kevin and Emma would pay for what they'd done. And as for whoever had exposed their affair, well, Jake wasn't sure if he wanted to thank them or destroy them too. Either way, he was going to find out who it was. And when he did, they'd regret ever getting involved. 3 months had passed since Jake had left Atlanta. The North Carolina mountains loomed in his rearview mirror as he drove into the small town he now called home. His life had imploded, and the rage that once drove him had cooled to a steady, simmering anger, still burning just below the surface. Jake pulled into the driveway of the modest cabin he was renting. As he stepped out of the car, his phone buzzed. It was yet another missed call from his mother. He ignored it, just as he had all the others. Inside, Jake booted up his laptop and opened his work emails. The remote engineering gigs he'd taken on provided a reliable income and, more importantly, the isolation he craved. No office politics, no small talk, and best of all, no reminders of the life he'd left behind. As Jake scrolled through his inbox, one particular email caught his eye. The subject line read, Kevin Monroe, confidential information. His heart began to race as he clicked it open. The email contained detailed records of Kevin's work transactions, including several suspiciously inflated deals. The sender remained anonymous, but the message was clear, this was a weapon. A cold smile spread across Jake's face. Got you, little brother, he muttered under his breath. For the next few days, Jake methodically combed through the data, verifying its legitimacy. Once he was certain the information was real, he created an anonymous email account and drafted a message addressed to Kevin's company's HR department and board of directors. His finger hovered over the send button. Was he really about to destroy his brother's career? The memory of Kevin's smug expression, taunting him about Emma, flashed in Jake's mind. Without another moment of hesitation, he clicked send. The fallout was quick and brutal. Within a week, word reached Jake through old contacts that Kevin had been fired, his once promising reputation now in ruins. Jake allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but it didn't last long. This was just the beginning. As time passed, Jake's thoughts turned to the question that had been gnawing at him ever since that night: who had sent him those damning photos and videos? He couldn't let it go and began to obsess over finding the answer. Night after night, he scoured his contacts, cross-referenced numbers, and reached out to old acquaintances, hoping for any lead. One evening, as Jake sifted through his notes, a name suddenly stood out: Madison Thompson, Kevin's ex-girlfriend, the one he left for Emma years ago. Could it be her? Jake wondered to himself. He found Madison's contact details and, after a moment of hesitation, sent her a text. "Madison, it's Jake Monroe. It's been a while, but I was hoping we could meet up for coffee. There's something I need to talk to you about." To Jake's surprise, Madison responded almost immediately. "Jake. It's been ages. Sure, I'd love to catch up. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the Bluebird Cafe?" The next day, Jake found himself sitting across from Madison in a cozy little coffee shop. She looked almost exactly as he remembered: dark hair, piercing eyes, and a smile that never quite reached them. "So, Jake," Madison said, stirring her coffee, "what brings you back around here? Last I heard, you were getting married in Atlanta." Jake's jaw tightened. "Plans changed," he replied bluntly. Madison raised an eyebrow. "Oh really? Do tell." Jake studied her face closely, searching for any sign that she already knew the story. "It's a long, messy tale," he said. "But I'm more interested in hearing about you. Are you still in marketing?" Madison nodded. "Yeah, just got a promotion to an executive position." She paused for a moment, then added with a sly smile, "I heard about Kevin's situation. Such a shame, isn't it?" The casual way she brought it up set off alarm bells in Jake's head. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "Madison, I've got to ask, were you involved in any of what happened?" Her smile widened, but she didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "You know, Jake, there's an old saying, what goes around, comes around. Kevin made a lot of enemies over the years. It was only a matter of time before it all caught up with him." A chill ran down Jake's spine. The knowing look in Madison's eyes, the way her smirk lingered, she definitely knew more than she was letting on. But before he could dig deeper, Madison shifted the conversation to safer topics. As they parted ways, her words echoed in Jake's mind. He was more certain than ever that she had played a role in what had happened, but he still needed proof. Back at his cabin, Jake's phone rang. It was Emma. He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the decline button. After a long pause, he reluctantly answered. "What do you want, Emma?" he asked, his voice colder than ice. "Jake, please," Emma's voice sounded desperate. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need your help." Jake let out a bitter laugh. "Help? You've got to be kidding." "Please, just listen," Emma begged. "I'm in my 3rd trimester now, and Kevin, he's completely abandoned me. I don't have anyone else to turn to." Jake felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, pity, and an uncomfortable flicker of concern. "What about the baby?" he asked, surprising even himself. "That's why I'm calling," Emma's voice cracked. "Jake, there's a chance the baby could be yours. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm begging you. We could do a paternity test. If it's your child, don't you want to know?" Jake's mind spun. He hadn't even considered the possibility that the child could be his. He'd been so consumed with rage and plotting his revenge that the pregnancy was pushed to the back of his mind. I need to think about this," Jake finally said, his voice tight. "I'll call you back." He hung up, his thoughts reeling as he tried to process this new revelation. Another piece of information soon made its way to him through his network of contacts. Kevin had moved in with a wealthy socialite, someone he met through his old job. He was living off her money, with no intention of helping Emma or the baby. The news reignited Jake's fury. Kevin hadn't changed, he was still selfish, still irresponsible. But now, Jake had a fresh target for his vengeance. Over the next few days, Jake dug into Kevin's new life. He learned the socialite's name, Victoria Carlisle, and found her address in an upscale Atlanta neighborhood. Slowly, a plan began to take shape. Jake picked up his phone and dialed Kevin's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Kevin, it's Jake," he said, doing his best to sound calm. "Look, I know things have been rough between us, but you're still my brother. I think it's time we talk and try to work things out. Call me when you get this." He hung up with a grim smile. The bait was set. Now, he just had to wait for Kevin to take it. It didn't take long. The very next day, Jake's phone rang. Kevin's name lit up the screen. "Hey, big brother," Kevin's voice was tentative. "I got your message. Are you really serious about talking?" Jake swallowed the disgust rising in his throat. "Yeah, I am. I've had some time to think, and, we're family, right? Let's meet up, have a drink, and try to fix this." He could hear the relief flooding Kevin's voice. "That sounds great, Jake, really great. When and where?" "How about next Friday? There's a bar downtown called the Rusty Anchor. Say, 8 p.m. "I'll be there," Kevin responded quickly. "And, Jake, thanks for reaching out. It means a lot." As Jake ended the call, a faint flicker of something stirred within him. Regret? Guilt? He shoved it aside. Kevin had made his bed. Now he had to lie in it. The week leading up to Friday felt like it dragged on forever. Jake spent his days working, his nights fine-tuning his plan. He casually reached out to some of Kevin's old co-workers and family friends, dropping hints that he and Kevin were meeting at the Rusty Anchor on Friday night to try to reconcile. He knew the word would spread like wildfire. Finally, Friday came. Jake arrived at the bar early, securing a table with a perfect view of the entrance. He sipped on a whiskey, his stomach churning with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Jake thought about Kevin and Emma, about the baby that would be born into this chaos. For a moment, he felt a flicker of regret for the scorched-earth approach he'd taken. But then the betrayal, the lies, and all the years of cleaning up after Kevin's messes came flooding back. No, he decided. He had done what had to be done. He took back control of his life, refused to be a victim, and now, at last, he was free. As the sun set over the city, Jake smiled to himself. He had survived the betrayal and come out stronger. No one would ever hurt him like that again. Jake stared at his phone, Kevin's name lighting up the screen. 6 months had passed since their confrontation at the Rusty Anchor. 6 months of silence, broken only by rumors of Kevin's continued downward spiral. Jake's jaw tightened as he hit the call button. "Jake?" Kevin's voice crackled through the speaker, a mix of surprise and weariness. "We need to talk," Jake said, his tone cold and flat. "In person. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., at the park near Mom and Dad's old house." "Jake, I don't think." "Be there," Jake interrupted, cutting off any protest and ending the call abruptly. The following evening, Jake arrived at the park early, tension rippling through his body. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he spotted Kevin approaching. His brother looked worn down, his clothes wrinkled, his hair disheveled. "Hey," Kevin said cautiously, stopping a few feet away. Jake didn't bother with a greeting. He locked eyes with Kevin, his stare hard and unyielding. "I want to know why, Kevin. Why Emma? Why wreck everything?" Kevin winced at the directness. I don't know, Jake. It just happened." "That's bull," Jake spat. "Things like that don't just happen. You made a choice. Both of you did. I'm sorry, Jake. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm truly, deeply sorry, Kevin pleaded, his voice cracking. Jake laughed bitterly. You're right. It doesn't change a damn thing. He leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. How's life treating you, Kevin? Enjoying the mess you made? Kevin's shoulders sagged. I haven't seen Emma or the baby. I can't face it. Typical, Jake sneered. Running away, like always. You're pathetic. What do you want from me, Jake? Kevin asked, his voice raw with desperation. I've lost everything, my job, my reputation, my family. I want you to suffer, Jake said coldly. I want you to wake up every day knowing you destroyed the only people who ever truly cared about you. I want you to carry that guilt for the rest of your miserable life. Kevin looked up, tears brimming in his eyes. Can't we move past this? We're still brothers. No, Jake said sharply. We're not. You're dead to me, Kevin. This is the last time you'll ever see me. Don't try to reach out again. With that, Jake turned and walked away, leaving Kevin alone on the bench. He felt no remorse, no sympathy, just a cold satisfaction that justice had been served. The next morning, Jake met up with Madison for coffee. She studied his expression as he sat down across from her. How did it go with Kevin? She asked, her eyes curious. Jake raised an eyebrow. How did you know about that? Madison shrugged, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I have my ways. Jake leaned back, giving her a steady look. It's time for the full truth, Madison. Why did you really send me those photos and videos? Madison's smile faded. You want the truth? Fine. I loved Kevin. When he left me for Emma, it broke me. I spent years picking up the pieces, always wondering what she had that I didn't. She paused, her expression hardening. When I found out about their affair, I saw my chance for payback. I knew if anyone could make Kevin pay, it was you. You used me, Jake said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Yes, Madison admitted without hesitation. But can you honestly say you regret knowing the truth? Jake paused, considering her words. No, he said finally. But don't think that makes us allies. You're as manipulative as Kevin. Madison gave a small nod, accepting the verdict. Fair enough. So, what's next for you? Move on, Jake replied firmly. Leave all of this behind. In the following weeks, Jake immersed himself in work, taking on more challenging projects than ever before. He pushed himself to the edge, reaching new levels of focus and productivity. His co-workers noticed the shift, commenting on how driven and laser-focused he'd become. One evening, as he wrapped up a particularly complicated project, his phone rang, unknown number. Hello? Jake, it's Emma. Jake's grip tightened around the phone. What do you want? I just wanted to let you know, the baby was born last week. A little girl. I named her Lily. Why are you telling me this? Jake asked, his voice cold and detached. Because, Emma's voice cracked, even after everything, you deserve to know. And I'm sorry, Jake. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to hear it, I'm sorry. You're right, Jake replied, his tone as hard as ever. It doesn't change a thing. Don't contact me again, Emma. Ever. He hung up the phone, feeling nothing but a dull, hollow ache where once there had been pain. The next day, Jake made a decision. He accepted a job offer from a prestigious engineering firm in Seattle. It was time for a fresh start, far from the ghosts of his past. On his final night in Atlanta, Jake stood in his empty apartment, staring out at the city skyline. He thought about the past year, the betrayal, the anger, the desire for revenge. It had shaped him into someone tougher, colder. But he didn't regret any of it. The world had shown him its true face, and he had adapted. His phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Heard you're leaving town. Drinks to celebrate?" Jake typed his response, "No. Goodbye, Madison." He pressed send, then powered off his phone. As he locked his apartment door for the last time, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over him. He had survived the betrayal, and now he was stronger for it. Walking into the warm Atlanta night, Jake was ready to face whatever came next. The past was dead. The future, uncertain. But one thing was clear: Jake Monroe would never let anyone get close enough to hurt him again. He climbed into his car, casting one final glance at the city that had been his home, the place where he had lost everything and rebuilt himself into something new. Without a trace of remorse or sentimentality, he started the engine and drove away, leaving behind the ashes of his old life and the people who had set it on fire. In the end, Jake realized, forgiveness wasn't the answer. It was the refusal to forget, the cold determination to keep moving forward without ever looking back, that had set him free. And that, he decided, was victory enough.